She didn't shout. She didn't fight back. But the mark on her cheek said everything. 34-year-old Angela Morris, 6 months pregnant, had just boarded Flight 417 on a crisp fall morning. Her dress was simple, elegant. Navy blue cotton stretched gently over her growing belly. She smiled politely, nodded to the man in 2C, and carefully placed her small tote in the overhead bin above her assigned seat, 2A, business class. She wasn't looking for attention. She just wanted to visit her ailing mother one state over, quietly, respectfully, without drama. But some people don't need a reason to assume you don't belong. Before she could sit, a flight attendant briskly approached. Sandra Reeves, mid-40s, stern face, clipped tone. "Excuse me, miss. Economy is behind you." Her voice cut like glass. Angela gently replied, "I'm in 2A." Sandra looked her up and down, then, without warning, snatched Angela's water bottle from her hands and barked, "Step aside. You're holding up boarding." Angela blinked, confused, hurt, but calm. "I'm not in the wrong cabin," she repeated, her tone even. The flight attendant scoffed. "You need to leave before I call security." Angela turned to grab her ticket from her purse, but before she could, a hand struck her face. Open palm, full force, in front of passengers, in front of cameras. The cabin went silent. That slap wasn't just physical. It carried decades of prejudice, layers of microaggressions, the ugly belief that some people, even pregnant, even soft-spoken, still need to be put in their place. And this time, it was broadcast. Because someone filmed it, someone posted it, and within minutes the internet was watching. What no one on that plane realized was this: Angela wasn't just any woman. And this wasn't going to end with an apology and a voucher. Because the man she dialed, calmly, silently, as her cheek turned red, wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't her brother. He wasn't a reporter. He was the CEO of Skylure Airlines, her husband, the owner of the entire company. And while she didn't raise her voice, her silence shook the cabin. Because the man she called wasn't just anyone. He was the man who signed every paycheck on that flight, the owner, the husband, the game changer. And this time, justice wasn't going to wait for landing. So before you look at someone and decide they don't belong, ask yourself, what if the person you just humiliated owns everything around you? Angela Morris had never liked flying. Not because she feared turbulence or confined spaces, but because air travel had a strange way of reminding her that respect wasn't always part of the ticket price. It didn't matter how neatly she dressed, how politely she spoke, or how quietly she carried herself. Somewhere between TSA and takeoff, someone would look at her skin and assume she didn't belong. But this trip wasn't about comfort or business class perks. It was about her mother. Angela's mom had been in and out of the hospital for weeks, and while the doctors said there was no emergency, Angela knew better. She needed to see her face, hold her hand, and say things she'd been putting off. That's why she booked the early flight, got the business class seat so she could have space for herself and her growing baby, and set off alone, even though her husband offered to charter a private jet. Angela had declined. Julian had smiled at her choice. He understood. She didn't want privilege. She wanted normal. But that morning, what she got instead was humiliation. Julian Morris wasn't just her husband. He was the founder and CEO of Skylure Airlines, one of the fastest-growing aviation companies in North America. He was known in Forbes circles for modernizing the airline's customer-first model and for building a company that prided itself on diversity, inclusion, and equal access in travel. But none of that mattered to Sandra Reeves when she looked at Angela that day. Sandra didn't see a customer. She didn't see a woman flying to visit her sick mother. She saw a disruption, a threat to the imagined order of who gets to sit in 2A. And so, in front of dozens of witnesses and silent cameras, she acted. Not with professionalism, not with policy, but with prejudice. That single slap echoed louder than jet engines. Now, seated in 2A, hand trembling slightly, Angela rested one palm over her belly and used the other to dial Julian's number. No tears, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet report. Sandra Reeves, Flight 4117, departing Dulles. I'll explain everything when we land. On the other end, Julian's voice remained calm. You okay? Yes, she whispered. But it happened. Again. And this time they laid hands on me. That was all he needed to hear. She ended the call, turned off her screen, and closed her eyes. Around her, the cabin buzzed with nervous energy. Passengers who had said nothing during the incident were now murmuring. Some pulled out their phones, others avoided eye contact. No one apologized. A few rows back, a man in his late 50s leaned over to his wife and whispered, "She should have just gone to coach. Why make a scene?" His wife hushed him, sensing the storm brewing behind those words. Another woman, recording with her phone, captured the moment in silence. She wouldn't post it right away, but the footage would change everything. Angela wasn't thinking about going viral. She wasn't thinking about lawsuits or statements. She was thinking about legacy. What kind of world was her child going to be born into? One where politeness was met with violence? One where no matter how much you paid, you'd still be viewed as suspicious? Or one where dignity had a fighting chance? That's why she hadn't yelled. That's why she hadn't fought back. Because if they expected her to lose control, they were going to be disappointed. Angela Morris was not a threat. She was a reminder. That respect isn't given based on skin tone or boarding group. It's owed by default. 10 years ago, Angela was a public school literature teacher in Baltimore. She knew what it felt like to walk into a room and be underestimated. But she also knew the power of narrative. She believed that storytelling was a weapon, one that could cut through bias and awaken empathy. That belief had never left her, even after she married Julian and their lives transformed. He built the airline. She stayed grounded in people. And together, they made it their quiet mission to change things, not from the top down, but one person, one story at a time. But this? This was a chapter neither of them expected. As the plane leveled out above the clouds, Angela sat still, hands folded, expression unreadable. She was aware of the stares, the half-glances, the tension humming in the air like static. But she didn't move. She didn't need to. Because she knew what was coming. And it wouldn't be loud. It would be precise, measured, irrefutable. The kind of accountability that doesn't come from rage, but from ownership. She didn't want revenge. She wanted something deeper, something lasting. She wanted the next pregnant black woman who sat in 2A to never have to justify her seat. She wanted every flight attendant who looked at a passenger and saw a stereotype to pause, just long enough to see a human being instead. She wanted her child to grow up in a world where flying didn't mean preparing for war. And somewhere, 30,000 feet below, a boardroom in Virginia was already waking up. Because when Julian Morris received that call, he didn't raise his voice either. He simply sent an internal message with 3 lines. Flight 417, Sandra Reeves, full suspension pending review. The clock had started ticking, and by the time the plane landed, everything would change. While Flight 417 cruised steadily across the sky, the real turbulence had already begun, on the ground. At Skylure's corporate headquarters in Virginia, a junior operations analyst received an urgent push notification on her screen. An executive command flagged a live incident report from a priority passenger channel. She clicked into the video feed. What she saw made her stomach drop. The timestamp was barely an hour old. A visibly pregnant black woman, calm and composed, was being slapped by a uniformed flight attendant. No escalation, no shouting, just violence. The analyst did what she was trained to do. She hit the red escalation key and notified senior legal and HR. Within 30 minutes, internal systems across Skylure lit up with alerts. Department heads were summoned. Sandra Reeves's employment profile was pulled. Past incidents came into focus. 3 prior complaints of inappropriate conduct, all quietly settled. Never escalated, never reviewed by the executive board. Until now. Back on the flight, Sandra moved stiffly up and down the aisle, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She hadn't yet been informed, but she could feel it. The tension, the eyes. A male passenger refused her drink service. Another woman, holding a toddler, turned away when Sandra offered a blanket. The authority she usually projected had faded. Her mask of control cracked. Angela remained silent, watching. She wasn't vindictive. She was aware of the power dynamics in motion, how easily this moment could be reduced to headlines and hashtags. But she also knew this wasn't just about her. It never had been. Because somewhere on another flight, another woman who looked like her might already be dealing with a similar form of quiet dismissal. Not a slap, not something that goes viral, but the 1,000 tiny ways people are told they don't belong, especially when they're black, especially when they're pregnant, especially when they dare to travel with dignity. What shocked Angela most wasn't the slap. It was how normal it felt afterward, how no one stepped in, how passengers avoided her eyes. The flight continued as though nothing had happened. That, she thought, was the true sickness in the system. Not the moment of violence, but the silence that followed. Meanwhile, Julian was already in motion. He didn't take to Twitter. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he did what every CEO in crisis must do. He pulled the files. He called the ethics committee, and he made sure that this time no one would bury it. Angela had never asked him to intervene. In fact, she often reminded him not to overreach. But this wasn't just about reputation. This was about accountability in the aviation industry. And Julian knew, if it could happen to his wife, with his name on the side of the plane, then how many others had been ignored? By the time the flight began its descent, an internal HR director had already landed in the destination city, discreetly, quietly. There would be no scene at the gate, no flashing cameras, but there would be questions, reports, and a permanent record that couldn't be erased. The woman who filmed the assault had also done something powerful. She had uploaded the video not to her main feed, but to a private group of black mothers who travel professionally. Within minutes, the story caught fire. Hashtags bloomed, screenshots spread, comments poured in, not just about this flight, but about a pattern of profiling, of being questioned, of being moved from assigned seats, of being asked repeatedly to prove their class. The viral moment wasn't just about one slap. It became a rallying cry. Dignity should fly first. Angela didn't know yet. She didn't know that her silence had spoken for thousands, that across the country, women were watching her with tears, with fury, with pride. All she knew was that as the plane touched down, her hands remained folded. Her breathing is steady. Her child is safe. Sandra received the call just after touchdown. She answered with a tight, professional tone. But her face fell as she listened. She turned stiffly toward Angela, perhaps to say something, perhaps to defend herself. But Angela didn't look at her. She was already preparing to deplane, her tote in hand, her posture unshaken. At the gate, no security waited. No spectacle. Just a man in a dark navy suit holding a badge that read, Director, Customer Ethics and Safety, Skylure Airlines. He greeted Angela with a quiet nod. We'll handle this. She nodded back. I know. She walked through the terminal like any other passenger. No entourage, no cameras, but something had changed. Not in her, but in the world around her. A boundary had shifted. A curtain had lifted. And somewhere in the minds of those watching, on that flight, in that terminal, across social media, there was a new awareness. One that couldn't be unlearned. 20 minutes after takeoff, the air in the cabin had not settled. Conversations were whispered, glances were sharp, and the tension sat thick above every row. The flight manager, a man named Curtis Lang, finally walked down the aisle toward 2A, trying to project calm professionalism. Angela was seated, hands gently folded over her belly, her eyes staring straight ahead. She hadn't said a word since the slap. No complaint, no drama, Just that one quiet phone call. Curtis crouched slightly and said, "Ma'am, may I ask, are you in touch with a lawyer? We've noticed several outgoing calls flagged as sensitive." Angela turned to him slowly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed again, screen up on the tray table. The caller ID glowed clearly. Julian Morris. Curtis went pale. His mouth opened, then shut again. For a split second, it looked like the ground beneath him had disappeared. He stood, murmured, "Thank you," and walked briskly to the cockpit. He didn't have all the details, but he knew one thing. Julian Morris wasn't just a lawyer. He was the name on his paycheck. In the cockpit, the captain reviewed a coded message that had just appeared on his secure Skylure comms tablet. It had come through a private channel, signed with a digital key only the CEO had access to. The message read, "Flight 4117, immediate personnel action is required. Suspend flight attendant Sandra Reeves pending investigation. Maintain full support for the passenger in seat 2A. Confirm internal report within 30 minutes. The captain blinked. He had flown for Skylure for over 17 years. Never once had he received a directive of this weight mid-flight. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. And not from PR, not from legal, from Julian Morris himself. He passed the tablet to Curtis, who read the message twice and whispered, "Oh my God." Without another word, they initiated the internal response protocol. Sandra was officially grounded. She just didn't know it yet. Back in the galley, Sandra Reeves poured herself a cup of coffee, smirking. She had just walked past Angela again, rolling her eyes. "Still pretending?" "Cute," she muttered under her breath. She had no idea what storm was brewing behind the cabin door. Then her phone buzzed, and buzzed again, then again. One notification, 2, 6, 10. Subject lines in rapid fire. "Urgent, immediate contact required, HR department. Notice of temporary suspension, internal investigation. Request for written statement, Legal Affairs Division. Incident footage acknowledged, action pending." Her smirk faded. Her fingers shook. She scrolled down to an email from Skylure's Internal Ethics Committee, marked Priority Red. It included the flight number, her name, and 3 chilling words. "Video confirmed, statement requested." Her hands gripped the counter. She turned toward the aisle and spotted Angela sitting quietly, unmoved, unreadable. For the first time since the slap, Sandra felt something she hadn't expected, fear. Exactly 90 minutes into the flight, a young passenger in row 5 uploaded a 27-second clip to Twitter. In the video, you could clearly see Sandra strike Angela, the audible gasp from surrounding passengers, and Angela's quiet, dignified stillness in response. The caption was simple. "This is how they treat a pregnant black woman in business class, on Skylure, unacceptable." The post took off like wildfire. By the time the plane was preparing for descent, the video had been shared by 5 major activist accounts, retweeted over 180,000 times, and was already trending on TikTok under "pregnant passenger slapped" and #Skylure discrimination. Influencers, civil rights lawyers, and airline watchdogs picked up the story. Screenshots of Angela's calm, composed face circulated alongside headlines like "Luxury Flight, No Dignity," "Who Protects Black Mothers in the Air," and "When Silence Speaks Louder Than Outrage." Skylure's PR department, caught flat-footed, scrambled to draft a statement. But Julian had already made it clear. "We don't post, we act." As the plane began its descent, Sandra Reeves sat frozen in the jump seat, phone dark, jaw clenched. Around her, cabin crew whispered nervously. A junior attendant leaned toward her and whispered, "They're waiting for her." Sandra looked confused. "Who?" But the answer came as the aircraft taxied to the gate. Through the oval window, a line of black SUVs appeared. Men in tailored suits stepped out. No badges, no flash. But each carried an embossed Skylure legal briefcase and wore dark pins signifying executive risk operations. A uniformed communications officer from the PR division stood beside them, flanked by 2 women from the Ethics and Diversity Office. Sandra's hands gripped the armrests as Angela stood and calmly gathered her bag. Angela stepped off the plane like any other passenger. No one cheered. No music, no cameras. Just quiet tension as the suited men greeted her by name, shook her hand, and escorted her through the terminal without ceremony. Not one of them knew she was Julian's wife, and she didn't tell them. She didn't have to. Because this wasn't about power, it was about principle. The press wanted a spectacle. They always did. The footage had gone viral, hashtags were trending globally, and cameras circled Skylure's headquarters like vultures. But Julian Morris refused to turn the moment into a performance. He didn't issue a flashy statement. No red-faced CEO on a podium. No legal theatrics. Instead, he called a closed-door executive meeting and quietly invoked the company's most powerful protocol, a Level 5 personnel code violation. Sandra Reeves wasn't just suspended. Her contract was terminated with cause, effective immediately. The internal memo cited gross misconduct, violation of non-discrimination policy, and physical assault on a protected passenger. There would be no severance, no settlement, and no silence clause. Angela knew none of this the day she landed. She hadn't asked for vengeance. All she wanted was to leave the airport with her child safe inside her, dignity intact, and a memory she could survive. But that night, as she sat on her mother's couch, sipping tea, her phone didn't stop ringing. Local news, national networks, international outlets. Everyone wanted the same thing, her voice. At first she declined. Let the footage speak. Let the facts stand. But then a letter came. Handwritten, slid into the mailbox at Julian's private address. No return name. Just, I saw what they did to you. I was on that plane. I said nothing. I'm sorry. Please don't stop speaking for the rest of us. Angela agreed to one interview. She chose a small outlet first, The Passage, a digital magazine focused on civil rights and black motherhood. The reporter asked the inevitable question, why didn't you flash your VIP badge or identify who you were? Angela answered without pause. Because I wanted to see how they treat someone who looks like me, without any title or power. Now I know. The clip reached 10 million views in 3 days. From that moment on, Angela's words became the headline. Not the slap, not the flight number. Her words. Julian watched it all unfold from his office, never once stepping into the spotlight. But he knew this wasn't just personal, it was structural. And so, he did what few executives dared to do. He put money behind the mission. Skylure publicly launched the Fly with Dignity initiative, beginning with a $2 million donation from the Morris Family Foundation. The program offered legal resources for passengers facing discrimination, grants for whistleblowers within the aviation industry, and a scholarship fund for women of color pursuing aviation careers. Critics accused the move of being damage control, until they saw who signed the checks. Julian refused to use the company account. He funded the initiative himself, privately. No tax write-off, no branding, just justice. The initiative gained momentum. Civil rights organizations voiced support. So did travel equity groups and, surprisingly, the National Flight Attendants Union. In a powerful open letter, they wrote, no flight attendant should behave as Sandra Reeves did, and no crew member should remain silent. Angela Morris reminded us that our uniforms do not make us right. Our actions do. But something deeper happened next. Skylure's internal ethics office, under Julian's directive, opened a confidential investigation into all unresolved bias complaints from the past 5 years. A pattern emerged. Sandra Reeves wasn't the only one. 3 other crew members, previously shielded by union reps and lax accountability, were named in reports involving racial microaggressions, seat downgrades without cause, and one incident eerily similar to Angela's, just never filmed. All 3 were placed on immediate leave pending external review. Angela received this update not from the press, but from Julian, quietly, over breakfast. He didn't ask how she felt. He didn't need to. She looked at him and said, this isn't about punishing people, it's about rebuilding trust. He nodded. We can't fix what we won't face. The response spread beyond Skylure. Competing airlines began reassessing their own anti-discrimination training. Diversity consulting firms reported spikes in demand. In one weekend, 3 other passengers came forward with their own stories of silent bias in luxury travel. Angela, now unintentionally at the center of a national conversation, agreed to speak again. This time, she chose NPR. "I'm not an activist," she said. "I'm a teacher, a mother, a woman who bought a seat and got a slap instead. I didn't speak out for attention. I spoke out because silence doesn't keep us safe." The host paused before replying, "What do you want to see happen now?" Angela's answer was measured. "I want flight crews to be trained not just in safety, but in humanity. I want companies to be less afraid of exposure and more committed to equity. And I want my daughter, when she grows up, to walk onto a plane and never wonder if she belongs." That clip aired during morning drive. Tens of millions heard it. Julian, sitting alone in his car outside Skylure's training facility, replayed it twice. Then he walked into a room filled with new recruits and said, "You are not just employees. You are ambassadors. You carry every passenger's story. And after what happened, you carry my family's too. Don't forget who you serve, or what it costs when you don't." That was the beginning of a new company mandate. Compassion is a core competency. Every single crew member, from entry level to executive, was required to undergo intensive retraining, not just a seminar, a transformation. And Angela? She disappeared from headlines just as quietly as she'd entered. No brand deals, no book tour. She went back to her mother's house, held her growing belly, and began writing again. This time, a curriculum titled Respect at 30,000 Feet, Teaching Civil Rights Through Real Events. She didn't need to win the argument. She had already won something far greater. She changed the air around her. Angela never returned to that airline as a passenger. She could have. She had lifetime status now. Every door opened, every amenity unlocked. But that wasn't the victory she needed. Instead, she chose to walk into classrooms again, rooms full of teenagers who still believed that fairness was a guarantee, that kindness was currency, that being good would be enough. She told them what happened, not to scare them, but to prepare them, because the world didn't always wait until you were ready. Sometimes it walked up to your face and tested your silence. What made Angela different wasn't her last name, it wasn't her access or the man she called that day. It was the choice she made after the slap, to remain calm in a moment designed to shatter her. And somehow that calm became louder than outrage. Sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is composure. She didn't yell, she didn't raise a fist, she didn't flash a title. She made the world see her for what she was, a human being who deserved dignity. In the months that followed, Skylure's transformation was studied in business schools, cited in DEI reports, and praised as a turning point in corporate ethics. But the truth is, it all started with a woman in a navy dress sitting in seat 2A who didn't flinch. Angela became a symbol not of power, but of restraint with purpose. And that's the part that hits hardest, because in a society addicted to outrage and spectacle, she reminded us that real change doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it shows up in stillness, in choosing not to become the monster you're up against. The slap faded. The headlines changed. But what remained was the question she never had to ask out loud. If I had looked different, would I have been treated differently? And for millions watching, the answer was clear. We tell stories like this not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the power. To remind ourselves that respect isn't a luxury, it's a right. And that for every Angela out there, poised, quiet, underestimated, there's a system that needs to be held accountable. So the next time someone assumes you don't belong, remember, belonging isn't something they can grant. It's something you carry. And sometimes, carrying it with grace is the loudest statement of all. I keep thinking about that seat, 2A, a number, a place, a symbol. We live in a world where access often comes with conditions. But maybe this story isn't about airlines. Maybe it's about how we look at each other before we know who we're looking at. Maybe it's a reminder that the person we ignore today might be the one who rewrites policy tomorrow. Angela didn't need a badge. She didn't need applause. She needed the world to pause. And it did. Because sometimes one woman's quiet strength is enough to reroute the entire flight path. If this story moved you, stay with us, share it, and tell your own. Because your silence matters, but your voice, when you choose to use it, can be a revolution.